Hey, welcome back to Album April. It's April 23rd, and today listen to the Marshall Mathers LP by Eminem. At this point in time, it has long since been established that Eminem is not just one of the most famous white rappers of all time, but one of the most famous rappers of all time, period. This album was released back when he was still relatively new. The Slim Shady LP was his first album to really blow up, and this came like 1 year after. This was his first album that was made after he became a star. And even among his pre-encore albums, this is often called the best one. My first impression of this album was exactly the same first impression that Eminem wanted everyone to have of this album concerning what the first two tracks are. Eminem is a jackass. The first track is a skit that's literally just a string of insults aimed directly at the person listening, and the second song is I'll Kill You. I'll Kill You is this hyperbolic track about all the various ways he can and will kill everybody, but then at the very end he's like, nah, I'm just kidding. Eminem is clearly trying to put on like this hyperbolic character for a lot of this album. Some of the songs don't really feel like that as much. Basically, the central tenet of this album is Eminem's relationship with his new fame, which first of all, like, cry me a river, you're super rich. But, like, it is a little bit interesting seeing this weird, like, dichotomy forming, where he likes getting money from being famous, and he likes the idea of having a lot of fans, but he really doesn't want to be, like, an influence on other people. But at the same time, he also seems to want to try to have it both ways, because he says multiple times, it's like, when I'm saying these things, I don't actually want to do these things. I don't actually believe the things I'm saying. But he says those things with so much conviction that sometimes it's kind of doubtful that that's entirely the case. The entirety of the song Kim made me truly, deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't funny, it was just upsetting. Even more so with the fact that Kim isn't a fictional character. Kim really was his ex-wife. And you hear him so, like, cartoonishly, but also so earnestly act out verbally abusing her, physically abusing her, then killing her and disposing of the body. One thing I've always felt was kind of interesting about Eminem is that despite the hate that makes up so much of his persona, it's like the talent is like only half of it. The other half is the way that he plays these characters. One thing that's always seemed to be consistent is that Eminem does seem to legitimately care for his daughter Haley. And it's very strange to think about that from like a 2023 perspective, because at the time she was a little kid, but now she's a full-grown adult. But I feel like for a lot of people, Haley will always be Marshall Mathers' young daughter. Anyway, the next question is, what was my favorite song from this album? And I'm gonna have to give that one to Stan. It uses a really good sample from a Dido song, whatever, and for the chorus, and that's really good. And it has a story. It's the story of this obsessed, mentally ill fan of Eminem who keeps writing him letters, and he gets more and more enraged that he's not getting the attention from Eminem that he wants. Now, most rational people can't expect a celebrity that they're interested in to just decide to communicate directly with them whenever they want. That's not realistic, obviously, but the way that Stan sort of twists it in his mind is very interesting. Stan was the only It Sucks Being Famous song on this album that I actually had any sort of sympathy for, because this really is a tough but still realistic situation. These type of things happen. One common theme throughout this album is also, like, the line between the persona that he has and who he is as a person sort of blurring together. Songs like The Way I Am and Who Knew sort of talks about that strange duality between Marshall Mathers the person and Eminem the rapper. But every time you start to actually, like, sympathize with him and start to see things from his perspective, he says something horrible. And speaking of which, were there songs on this album that I didn't like? Yes, absolutely. There were some songs that I can't like because they are straight up just hateful songs. If you look at some of the lyrics from Marshall Mathers or Criminal, it's very clear. At this point in time, Eminem either was deeply homophobic or legitimately thought that homophobia was funny. The violent tendencies felt like he was playing them up. Even the misogyny seemed theatrical for most of it, but the homophobia felt so casual, so brazen. I've come to understand that the phrase "it was a different time" is actually a cop-out for most part, but I will say it was a very different time because during the time of this release, like on this album, he talks about people saying, oh, he's corrupting the minds of the children. They're going to start swearing and being violent and shooting up schools. If he released the album now, that would not be the concern of the people watching. They would be more concerned about the homophobia and the misogyny on this album than the violent crime or drug use. So, from a technical standpoint, this album absolutely holds up. The flow is immaculate, the rhymes, the rhythms, it all works so well. From a content perspective, it is very antiquated and outdated. And the concept of putting on a character and trying to be funny can only take you so far. Overall, I would say it does hold up, not quite so much for being enjoyable, but just for being like a fascinating psychological study into the mind of both this character and the person that Marshall Mathers was at the time. However, if you think that this current cultural landscape doesn't have a place for something like this, I can understand that, because some of it is kind of heinous. Ultimately, I think that just comes up to the personal preference and what they're willing to stomach when it comes to listening to music. And wow, that was longer than I was expecting. I guess I'll see you tomorrow.